Hello, people, and welcome to another episode of Fencing Flops. This week, we're going to be taking a look at the fencing scene from the movie I Love You, Man. So let's see what it has to offer.
Suck it! Good bow, Gil. Sweet bow. Good job. Wow. Way to go, buddy. Great bow. Fuck off.
Okay, so that was a lot that happened in a very short amount of time. So I'm probably gonna watch it again. First of all, my very first impression of it is they're very athletic. So I'm not even sure if these were the actual actors themselves. It looks like they might have hired extras in order to pull that off, which is the nice thing about filming fencing is that's very easy to do. But let's go ahead and take a look at it sort of step by step because I just got to absorb that a little bit more. So probably right there is a good place to stop. So the fencer on the left, while it looks like something that wouldn't be legal, I believe it actually is. It's a little bit out there, and it can easily backfire on you if you don't do it right. Because the thing is, they're fencing foil, and in foil, only the torso is valid target area, which means that everything else, the head, the arms, and the legs, is all non-valid target area. So if your opponent hits there, even if they have priority, they won't score. There's no way to score a valid touch by hitting your opponent on non-valid target area. So that being said, one of the penalties, and probably one of the most common penalties seen in foil, is something called covering target area, where you take something that is non-valid target area, usually the arm, and you place it over something that is valid target area. Now, what's funny is this is actually allowed as long as you're not within fencing distance of your opponent. If your opponent is close enough to score and you do this, then you will receive a warning. And, it's a first offense penalty, which will then, if repeated, lead to second and third offenses. So the reason I bring that up is because it looked like he might have done that in a way that is not um, immediately obvious, at least to someone who isn't accustomed to fencing, which is that he twisted his body to the side so that this shoulder, which is non-valid target area, actually displaces the valid target area. So if you twist enough, or sometimes even duck your head enough in a certain way, it can count against you. Because while it's not as obvious as just taking your non fencing arm and holding it over your chest, it's still a way to cover target area. That doesn't necessarily make it something that a ref will call halt for, but once they do call halt, they will tell you that you cover target area and they will penalize you accordingly. So that's one thing that it looks like he might have done, but that wasn't his intention. His intention was doing something that looked like a backwards flick. Now, a flick is a move most often seen in foil, but it is seen in the other two weapons as well. What it is basically an attack from an extreme angle where the fencer is counting on the flexibility of the blade in order to move the tip forward enough to still land on their opponent. This is something that is difficult to do, but it is seen every now and then. Now, the thing that makes this scene really unique is the fact that he did it around his back. I would just call this as a backwards flick, but there is a fencer who recently has started to make something very close to this sort of his signature move. He was a foil Olympian for the US named Miles Chamley Watson. Miles is a very tall fencer, and he's also very flexible. It was these two things that sort of led him to start using this thing that not many people would do, especially not in such a high stakes tournament setting, which is a flick that is backwards around the head. And people started referring to this as the Chamley Watson. So it's a move that he didn't really invent, but he started to make popular and seen on a main stage in terms of fencing. So this is a little different from that, but it's along the same lines. So it's an unusual move. So on one hand, you probably wouldn't see it too much in practice or whatever this is. I've never seen the movie, so I don't actually know if this is a tournament or not. It does mean that whoever wrote this scene probably did a lot of research, or maybe was even a fencer themselves for them to even be aware of this. Because it's kind of one of those techniques that you only really start to see until you've put several years into foil fencing. So that's the very first thing. So let's keep. So let's look at what happens next. So that's the next most unusual thing. Now, right before that was something that I noticed that I kind of liked that they threw in, which is a failed flesh. At one point, the fencer on the left gains priority, and instead of riposting with a simple attack, which in this case would have been just a straight extension of the arm, he attempted a flesh. But the flesh was parried rather early, and he gave up on it. You actually see that every now and then. Someone will attempt a flesh, but before they even get to the point where it's basically all or nothing, the flesh fails in some way. But because it happens so early, the attacking fencer is able to sort of put on the brakes and select something different to do. Because at that point they're at a disadvantage, but they have time to recover instead of just going full tilt. But that was what happened right before this. This image right here, this is unusual. I've never seen this before. I've never seen anything like it. If you're a fencer and you've seen someone do something like this, then, please leave it in the comments. Hopefully with a picture or video if you manage to snag one. But this is odd. First of all, the hand on the strip. That's not allowed. Basically, you can't have too many points of contact on the strip, and there's this whole thing about it, about not fencing while falling, and then that started this whole discussion, many years ago about, well, when exactly is it considered falling? Maybe it's just, maybe they're ducking, maybe they're doing something weird with their momentum, but they're in control, but it looks like they're falling. So they had to sort of figure out where the line was, and I believe the main compromise they came up with was if your backhand is on the ground, then that stops the action. I don't particularly remember if this constitutes any sort of penalty, but I do know that it immediately stops the action, and there's a good chance that it's a yellow card. The odd thing is his back leg. I have no idea what his back leg is doing. This is one of those things where they start to ignore form and proper technique and just go for something that looks flashy and cool. Now, there are moves in fencing, particularly foil, although I might be a little bit biased because I started in foil, that can look flashy, that you can make look cool, but there's still correct, proper techniques and movements. This little pose here, that's certainly not one of them. I don't even know what someone would call it. It would be something that would stop the action because neither of your feet are allowed to leave the strip, even the back one. So he would have stopped the action with both his hand on the strip and his back foot off the strip. And because of the back foot being off the strip, he would lose a meter. So when the refs would set them up again in the proper on guard position and tell them to fence again, because in this case the action was halted but no one scored, then the point of engagement would then be moved back a meter towards the fencer that made the mistake, in this case to the left. Yeah, it's not something you really want to do, and I'm not even sure. Like, the weird thing is, like I said, this is something to just make things look cooler, but I have no idea where they came up with the idea for this particular. I don't even want to call that a form. I don't know what it is. It looks like gymnastics. It's just odd and it throws me off. But it's what they did. They decided to do this for some reason. Yeah, I don't really have any more to say about that. So let's keep going.
Suck it! Good bow, Gil. Sweet bow. Good job. Wow. Way to go, buddy. Great bow. Fuck off.
That whole throwing the mask thing, and he didn't actually swear, but he got kind of close to it. I'm starting to think this is practice, so that's kind of allowed. I mean, it's frowned upon, certainly, and definitely in a tournament, throwing your mask, that is an immediate offense. But I can kind of understand the emotion behind it. Like, losing to someone, especially someone who did that weird squirmy thing. That honestly, if that happened to me and somehow they actually got a point out of it, I'd be pretty embarrassed. So I probably would want to throw my mask, but I wouldn't. But that's something that I want to bring up because that's something that I've seen in movies and TV shows about modern fencing, where someone throws their mask because they're really mad. It's, I get it. It's something that's supposed to convey that, the character is really mad, but it's something that is highly discouraged in fencing. Like, if you throw your mask, even at practice, you have now become that guy. Like, someone who is not able to control their emotions, and no one wants to be that person. Alright, so that's the end of that. At least they saluted. They didn't shake hands, but they did salute. And that's something that is realistic. Having to salute an opponent that you're mad at, even in practice. That happens a lot. And the whole, like any sort of dialogue like that after a bout, off the strip, especially with your clubmates, that is realistic. Like, we don't tell each other to, F word off every single time, but, words do get exchanged sometimes if you're in a bad mood. So, going to jump to a different part where it's not technically fencing, but it has to do with it, so I'm going to go ahead and include it. I don't actually know where this scene occurs in relation to the one that we just saw, so I think it's like directly after, because it kind of happens in the locker room.
Bro, really sorry I lost my shit out there. I just did not see that cortada coming. Oh, hey man, don't worry. You came in with a pretty sweet glaze eye.
Anybody see my manchette?
You look under your plastron, Dick Wicker?
Fuck you, Larry!
Oh, fuck you, Eugene. Classic.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay, so they're trying to make things appear very authentic and genuine, and they actually put some good effort in. What they referred to as an cortada was this. This was their attempt at it. That's not an cortada. An cortada is this. You see how the defending fencer turns their entire body away from their opponent as to avoid being touched. That is an cortada. Now, it's very different from what we saw, because in the movie, the fencer that they said was the one to do the cortada was actually making an attack with priority and just decided to do a weird spin with it. An cortada is used in an entirely different situation. It is when you are defending and the attacking fencer attacks, and you counterattack into it. Now, normally, a counterattack does not take priority. If one fencer begins their attack and the other fencer begins their attack after the first one, but they don't do anything to take the priority from the first attack, then the second attack is referred to as a counterattack. And if they both hit, then the priority belongs to the fencer who attacked first. In cortada is a type of counterattack where you do counterattack, you stick your arm out, but you rotate your entire body so that they don't hit you. So it doesn't necessarily take right of way because you're not actually defending yourself, you're dodging. And that's a little bit different. The only way that in cortada can get you a touch is if your opponent straight up misses you while you hit them. In that case, it doesn't really matter what happened, because even if it was a difficult action, if the machine registers only one touch, then that means that only one fencer hit. So a good ref will still call the action. They'll say the most recent action that occurred leading up to the touch, because that's kind of part of their job. But if it's only one light, then it can only possibly belong to one fencer. So that's the whole idea behind the incortada. It doesn't take priority by defending you, it gets you the touch by making sure your opponent just misses you entirely. So that's not what happened here, but again, I commend them for, digging deep and really trying. And then the other thing that I want to bring up is how they treat each other in the locker room afterwards. That also is pretty realistic. Tensions can get pretty high even amongst friends while fencing, while actually on the strip, but then it all kind of melts away afterwards, and especially at the end of practice, when you've had a chance to calm down and, maybe reflect on something you might have said that you regret at the time. There's kind of a saying in the fencing community, which is, you can be the worst of enemies on the strip, but off the strip you're the best of friends. And it's totally true, and we see an example of it here. One of them gets really mad because they lost in a certain way, or maybe just because they lost. And then afterwards, they're like, hey, I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have acted that way. That has happened quite a few times. It's happened to me, and I've been guilty of it. And I'm pretty sure any fencer watching this can say the same thing. So that was the scene there. I'm not really sure what to say about this, because it's clear that they really do try, and they put in a good effort to really emulate fencing and really show what it's like, and they do a fairly decent job. But they kind of miss the mark a little bit. They actually go a little overboard, and it's not totally accurate, sort of almost because they're trying too hard. But still, they did a fairly good job. So they brought in a lot of things that you don't normally see in movies and TV shows that are trying to depict fencing. They actually try to showcase how, back and forth it is, how athletic it can be, and they try to dig up terms that, maybe not a lot of people outside of fencing have heard of, and they do actually a pretty good job of trying to showcase it. But then, like I said, they kind of missed the mark by going overboard. They sort of bite off more than they can chew. That's what it looked like here. But overall, I would say it was pretty good. I'm not one for all the showmanship and really flashiness that they do. I prefer they just get something wrong in a different way, but maybe that's just me. So I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say this got a 7 out of 10. They put in a good effort and they did try, and they got close. They just kind of missed it on a few things. So those are my thoughts on this scene from the movie I Love You Man. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.